In 1991, Universal launched Fright Nights. For 3 nights, Universal Studios Orlando would be taken over with all things horror. The following year, the event was renamed to Halloween Horror Nights. This year, in 2019, from September 6th, the event would return for over 40 nights, more popular than ever, offering all new frights, fun, and even more horror.
My city is sick. The plague spreads like wildfire through these corrupt streets. As a man of medicine, I have taken it upon myself to find an antidote. But for all my efforts, I have only made things worse. I have turned mankind into a monstrosity. And now my own metamorphosis is imminent. I have unleashed the monster that lives within me.
The 29th year of the world's premier Halloween event would take fear to the max, continuing the 80s theme of the previous year with 10 totally new haunted houses, 5 scare zones, and finally 2 shows again. As the final weekend approaches and speculation begins for Halloween Horror Nights 30, it's time to take an expedition looking at Halloween Horror Nights 29.
Are you with me, my people? Are you with me?
It goes without saying, but this is just my experience and thoughts on this year's event, and I'm sure your opinion differs. So make sure to let me know in the comments below what you loved and didn't about this year.
Let the mayhem begin.
The overall 80s theme this year took a step up from 28, and it could be felt throughout the whole event in nearly every area. From the entrance music and lighting to the merch, food, and atmosphere, this is the first time since Halloween Horror Nights 25 that the park has felt like such a cohesive experience rather than just loose connections. One of the most fitting for the theme is located on the lagoon, so let's start with the shows. Firstly, one of my major complaints about Horror Nights 28 was the lack of shows with just one, which I didn't even really enjoy and was a one and done for me. Would I like more than 2 shows? Of course, but this year improved on the previous year in every way. Firstly, the new addition, Halloween Marathon of Mayhem, a monstrous new show rising from the depths of the Universal Studios lagoon. While the previous version would use the icons to introduce sections of classic horror movies on the Universal 360 spheres, the 2019 version would take the cinematic celebration fountains and lighting to create a tribute to some of the year's IPs. This show is a visual delight and the perfect addition to the event, expanding on the theme and aesthetics of the neon 80s look. Featuring scenes from Stranger Things, Ghostbusters, Universal Monsters, and Killer Clowns. The lighting and soundtrack for this show is incredible. The perfect break from the scares elsewhere in the park and perhaps the best lagoon show ever to exist at the park, not counting Dynamite Nights of course. The amazing images, lights, sounds and projection mapping really complements the 10 different houses of Halloween Horror Nights 29, with its neon feel showcasing the different house IPs fitting for the era. I hope this edition continues in future years. It will be really hard to top this year's already. Perhaps a new retrospective anniversary show next year, similar to Sweet 16, would go down well. If you saw my video last year, I didn't really enjoy the Academy of Villains Cyberpunk show. I hated it in the Fear Factor Stadium rather than outside, and as the sole show for Halloween Horror Nights 28, I felt it was a huge disappointment. Academy of Villains Altered States is better in every single way, but more horror theme fits perfectly, which is what made people fall in love with this show in the first place. This time featuring a great soundtrack and set, along with a story that is very fitting. While I would still prefer to see this show on an outside stage where you can stand, it was a vast improvement over the previous show. Great to see some of the more popular acts from previous years return. This year the fun of the show was back, and it is much better for repeat viewings. This time the story has a Jekyll and Hyde theme, with multiple different acts performing throughout, including the ball guy, who by the end was one of my favourites, the always fun contortionist, and the return of the shadow scene from House of Fear in 2016. In fact, much of Altered States was a ramped up House of Fear, one of the better shows at Halloween Horror Nights. With the perfect mix of theatrics and dancing, Altered States was one I continued to see over and over and will miss when it's gone. There has been a survey floating around about Bill and Ted, and I would of course still love to see the return of the Wild Stallions for Halloween Horror Nights 30, but the perfect show lineup would include the Lagoon Show, a Bill and Ted style show, along with Academy of Villains back on an outside stage. And if we're wishing for shows, we may as well throw an Icon show in there too. Fingers crossed for next year. Food and drink wise, the year offered some of the best beers and alcoholic drink choices yet, with the collectible Blinky Cups being a huge hit. Obviously, I got all of them. One thing I found interesting this year was the lack of lines at the bars, either because of the increased amount of them or the younger age of the crowd attending, but unlike last year, I barely had to wait anywhere to get a beer even on busy nights, except Finnegan's of course. The gin specialty drink was one of the highlights. Food-wise, the Starcourt Mall offered an interesting mix of food options, and the returning pizza fries being as good as ever. S'mores fries are not for me though. The hardest part of this video to talk about is for sure the scare zones, because I just didn't really enjoy them all that much this year, and they were overall the part of the event which I think lacked. Zombieland Double Tap was my least favourite. Based on both films, which were really great, the scare zone puts you into the middle of the infection area and zombies swarm around you. Except this is the first time in a long time that the largest scare zone has just felt kinda empty. The zombies that are in the zone blend in as just normal people rather than stand out. The overall location of this zone is just too big for what it was. The toilet gag can be funny but gets too crowded with people knowing it is there, ruining the scare. The lighting is minimal, and while the drop tower looks great, there are too many static props which are not very interesting. My biggest complaint though is the Zombie Kill of the Week show. Like Vamp last year, rather than different shows, they run the same show with different actors from the movie playing out over and over and over every 10 minutes with the exact same clown scene. The first time you see it, it's pretty cool I guess, but the area just has no atmosphere at all, with a giant Zombieland 2 photo op that nobody cares about in the center. It's not even a Universal movie franchise, so I've no idea why it is there other than that Sony offered up a cheaper alternative to what was originally planned to go here. I think this may be the worst scare zone in New York for many years, and that includes Survive or Die. The next two scare zones are about equal for me. First, Vikings Undead, where undead Vikings have risen and laid siege to Central Park. The goriest of the scare zones by far, features great lighting along with a few nice set pieces, but it's just not very memorable. The costumes and characters don't really stand out, and it will go down I'm sure as a forgettable zone in the future. Not terrible, but not great. I do love the amount of fog within the area though, which gives it a great atmosphere. Vanity Ball is one of the zones that does have some great memorable characters within. Interactive elements, great lighting and design, and mini shows throughout the night, it just doesn't draw me in. It's definitely the scare zone with the most going on to bring you back, and the actors on the mic interacting with guests and actors all night long are a great touch. In this zone, beauty is pain, literally, and patients were transformed into horrifying living works of art. Full of actors and great visuals with the sets and mini-shows that in multiple visits I've only managed to catch once or twice. The zone just isn't very scary though. In fact, Not Scary covers most of the scare zones this year. The Chainsaw team over by Simpsons once again do a good job, this time in neon outfits, which is not quite as fun as the clowns of last year, but it's still a good extra addition. Rob Zombie Hellbilly Deluxe. Step into the heavy metal horror of Rob Zombie's music. The most visually interesting of the zones by a huge mile set-wise. I have no knowledge of Rob Zombie music before this event. I imagine if you're a fan, this is a dream come true zone. The characters are amazing, the sets are great, the fire going off adds to the atmosphere, and it has some of the best photo ops this year. When this was announced, many people scoffed at the idea, but what we got was actually one of the best scare zones this year. The downside is the area is so crowded at nearly all times, and again, it's not very scary. I would have loved to have seen this take over the whole of New York, with some stages set up within and the music pumped throughout. Finally, an arcade. An 80s inspired arcade taking over Avenue of the Stars. Here, game over means a permanent end for you when a gang of neon slashers are out to play. This zone looks stunning, the best use of the entrance area for some time, tying directly into the year's theme in visuals and music, which really sets the tone for the overall event. The arcade cabinets make for the perfect photo op for the year's event, along with the neon scare actors who do a great job trying to scare. The last few years have seen an increased visual appeal in this front zone, and I hope this continues next year, setting the tone for the whole event and telling the story of Halloween Horror Nights 29. Of course, the rides remain open as always, including The Simpsons on select nights, which actually seems to be open more than Fast and Furious, which remains empty nearly every single night and closes early. At least you can skip the pre-show though.
Turn down for what?
The Tribute Store is by far the best use of the Mummy extended queue line, expanded in size with an extra room, which brings us to the merchandise of Halloween Horror Nights 29. This year, they really killed it merchandise-wise, with nearly every t-shirt, mug, blinky cup, socks, or the exclusive design prints and magnets, and much more. Never have I wanted to pick up as many items as this year. Speaking of merchandise, there is only 1 week left to get an Expedition Halloween Horror Nights t-shirt before they will be retired for the year on November 5th. You can use the code HORROR for 10% off and check the description for a link. Also, follow along on Instagram at Expedition Theme Park for an upcoming giveaway of an Expedition Horror Nights t-shirt. Overall, the scare zones this year have lacked something to really draw you in and keep you coming back. Most of them being a large downgrade on Halloween Horror Nights 28 interactive, scary, and fun areas. The shows though took a drastic increase in quality that I hope continues into next year. The main draw of Halloween Horror Nights though is of course the houses. Lights, sounds and projection mapping really complements the 10 different houses of Halloween Horror Nights 29. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Expedition Haunts. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to join the expedition and turn on the notification bell to be alerted when our second part of this video releases, looking at the houses. What scare zones did you enjoy at Halloween Horror Nights 29? Let me know in the comments below. A special thank you to our Patreons for supporting the channel, and we will see you next time.